When I discovered that my own daughter was pregnant with my husband's child, I felt like my entire world had collapsed. But what came after was even worse. Good morning, my dear viewers. My name is Margaret, I'm 74 years old, and today I'm going to share a story that I've kept deep in my heart for a very long time. It's not easy to talk about this, but I feel that perhaps my experience might help someone who's going through difficult times. Before I begin, I'd like to ask you who are watching now to please leave a like on this video and also subscribe to the channel. It helps tremendously, and I'd love if you could tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I adore knowing that my stories reach so many different places. Let's go back to the year 1968. I was only 25 years old, and one of the few women in my small town who had managed to study and graduate. I worked as a pharmacist, something that filled me with pride, even though many people at that time thought women shouldn't work outside the home. A woman's place is taking care of the home, they would tell me. But I always knew I could do more. My husband Walter was 32 and owned a fabric store that was growing quite well. We met when I returned from the city after graduating. He seemed so different from the other young men in town. He said he admired my intelligence, that he wanted a real woman by his side, not just someone to cook and clean the house. We married after 6 months of dating. It was a simple but beautiful ceremony. I remember as if it were yesterday my simple white dress that I helped design myself. We were happy, at least I thought we were. The only problem in our marriage was that after 2 years of trying, we discovered I couldn't have children. It was a hard blow for both of us. It was then that fate brought Julie into our lives. A young, single mother, almost still a girl, appeared at the pharmacy where I worked with a newborn baby in her arms. She was desperate, unable to care for the child. The father had disappeared as soon as he found out about the pregnancy. The girl was crying as she told me that her family had thrown her out of the house. "I don't know what to do, ma'am. I have nowhere to go. I can't take care of this child," she told me with tears in her eyes. At that moment, I felt God was answering our prayers in an unexpected way. I took the young woman to my home, talked with Walter, and we decided to adopt the child. The biological mother left to try her luck in the city, and we kept the baby, a beautiful little girl we named Julie. We raised Julie as if she were our own flesh and blood. We never hid from her that she was adopted, but we always made it clear that we loved her as if she were our own. And it was true. Every first step, every new word, every birthday, everything was a cause for joy and celebration in our home. The years went by, and our life seemed perfect. I continued working at the pharmacy, which grew and became important to the community. Many poor people couldn't afford medicine, and I often helped them by setting aside free samples or even paying out of my own pocket when necessary. This meant I spent many hours away from home, arriving late, exhausted, but fulfilled. Walter also expanded his business. Besides the fabric store, he started selling furniture and appliances, taking advantage of the town's growth. He spent a lot of time at home, as he had employees who took care of the stores while he managed the finances in the office we set up in the back of our house. And Julie? Julie grew up and became a beautiful young woman. When she reached adolescence at 17, she had long, black hair and green eyes that attracted attention wherever she went. Intelligent, studious, she seemed to have inherited my love for books, even though we didn't share the same blood. I was so proud of her. At that time, I began to notice some changes in Julie's behavior. She seemed more distant, sometimes irritated with me for no apparent reason. I thought it was just normal teenage rebelliousness, hormones. Walter always defended her when we had any disagreement. "You work too much, Margaret. The girl misses you," he would say. And I felt guilty, torn between my professional calling and my role as a mother. I also began to notice how the two of them seemed increasingly close. When I arrived home, I frequently found them whispering together in the living room, laughing together. At first, it seemed sweet to me, a father and daughter with a close relationship. Who could have imagined? One Sunday afternoon, while Walter had gone to solve a problem at the store and Julie was at a friend's house, I decided to tidy up her room. Teenagers are always so disorganized, aren't they? While putting away some clothes that were thrown on the bed, I found a notebook hidden under the mattress. I had no intention of invading my daughter's privacy, I swear to God. But the notebook fell open on the floor when I pulled a sheet, and my eyes caught my name written there. That was the moment when my life began to fall apart. The notebook was a diary. On the pages, in that round, neat handwriting that I myself had taught her, Julie wrote about her feelings for Walter. They weren't feelings of a daughter for a father, no. They were the words of a woman in love with a man. In the pages, she described secret encounters when I was at the pharmacy, stolen kisses, promises made. And the worst? She wrote that she was pregnant with his child, pregnant by my husband, the man she had called father since she learned to speak. Walter said we'll tell her the baby is Johnny's from school. Mom is so naive she'll believe anything. He says she's an incomplete woman who can't have children and that I can give him what she never could. When the baby is born, we'll be a real family without her. I read and reread those words, trying to understand how this could be possible, how the man who swore to love me and the girl I raised with such care could conspire against me in this way. How could they be so cruel? My head was spinning, my heart beating so hard it felt like it would come out of my mouth. I spent the entire afternoon sitting on her bed with that diary in my hands, tears falling nonstop. When I heard the front door open and their voices arriving together, laughing, I felt a courage I didn't know I had within me. I took the diary and went downstairs. They were in the living room, sitting side by side on the sofa, so close that their shoulders were touching. When they saw me, with my face swollen from crying and the diary in my hand, the smile disappeared from both their faces. "What's wrong, Margaret? Why are you crying?" Walter asked, feigning concern. I didn't answer. I just threw the diary on the coffee table. Julie turned pale when she recognized her secret notebook. Walter maintained an impassive face, but I saw a muscle twitch in his jaw. It was what always happened when he was nervous. "I want to know if it's true," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. "I want to hear it from your mouths." I waited for them to deny it, to make up some excuse, to say it was all the imagination of a confused teenager. But that's not what happened. Walter stood up, tall as he always was, and faced me with a coldness I had never seen in his eyes before. "Yes, it's true, Margaret. We didn't plan for this to happen, but it did. Julie is expecting my child. My flesh and blood child, which you could never give me." I felt as if I had been slapped in the face. I looked at Julie, expecting to see remorse, shame, anything that showed my girl was still in there somewhere. But her green eyes, which once looked at me with love, now overflowed with contempt. "You're never home, Mom. You never had time for us. Always your patience, your pharmacy, your causes. Walter made me feel truly loved." "Loved? He's your father, Julie." "The man who raised you since you were a baby," I shouted, unable to believe what I was hearing. It was then that she said the words that cut deeper than any knife could. "You're not my real mother. You only raised me because you felt sorry for my biological mother. And him, he was never my real father. Our blood is not the same. We're just a man and a woman who love each other." That night, I didn't sleep at home. I couldn't stay under the same roof as them, breathing the same air, feeling the weight of betrayal in every corner of that home I built with so much love. I took only a small suitcase with some clothes and went to the pharmacy. In the back, there was a small storage room where we kept medications. A cramped, damp space with only a narrow window. I improvised a bed with some old blankets and cried until dawn. The sun rose, but for me, it seemed the world had ended. How would I continue living after this? How would I look people in the eye? In a small community like ours, news traveled fast as the wind. I spent the entire day sitting on the floor of that storage room, unable to eat, unable to think straight. In the late afternoon, I heard knocks on the pharmacy door. It was Mrs. Jenkins, an elderly lady who lived near our house and was always quite the gossip. I opened the door, trying to disguise my swollen eyes from crying so much. "I came to get my blood pressure medicine, Margaret, and also, well, I heard about what happened. The whole town is already talking about it." I felt my stomach sink. Of course they already knew. Walter probably wasted no time in telling his version of the story, painting me as the villain. "What are they saying, Mrs. Jenkins?" The old woman looked away, uncomfortable. "They're saying that you abandoned your home, that you never gave attention to your husband and daughter, that you lived more for others than for your family. They say that if you had been a good wife and mother, this would never have happened." Each word was like a stab. I was being blamed for my own misfortune. People, instead of condemning a man who got involved with his own adopted daughter, a minor who grew up calling him father, were condemning me for working, for helping those in need, for having a profession. And about Walter and Julie, what are they saying about them? Mrs. Jenkins sighed before answering. "They say it's not wrong, since the girl is not his flesh and blood daughter. Some even find it romantic. Your husband told everyone that he's going to take responsibility for the baby, that they're going to form a family. He said that you always knew you couldn't have children, and that even so, you deprived them of a complete family." I didn't respond anymore. I gave Mrs. Jenkins her blood pressure medicine and closed the pharmacy as soon as she left. I went back to my improvised storage room and cried until I had no more tears. The following days were even worse. Several people stopped coming to the pharmacy. Some looked at me with pity, others with contempt. I heard whispers, saw sideways glances. I, who had always been respected in town for my work, was now seen as a failed woman, who couldn't hold on to her husband, who didn't give enough attention to her daughter. A week later, Walter appeared at the pharmacy. He was well dressed as always, hair combed back, perfumed. He entered as if he owned the place. The bell on the door rang, and when I looked up and saw him, I felt my entire body tremble. "What do you want here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I came to resolve our situation, Margaret. It can't continue like this. People are talking." "People always talk, Walter. I don't care about that." He smiled sideways, that smile that once charmed me and now made me nauseous. "I came to propose a deal. The house is ours. We bought it together, but I'm willing to give you a good sum for you to start over in another city. Nobody needs to go through more embarrassment. You can open another pharmacy, meet other people, and we'll continue our life here." I looked at that man I once loved and recognized nothing of the young man I fell in love with. How could he be so cold, so calculating? How could he talk about our separation as if he were negotiating the purchase of another store? "I don't want your money, Walter. I'm not going to run away as if I did something wrong. This town is mine too. I built my life here. I have my work. People who depend on me." His face transformed. The mask of civility fell, and I saw anger in his eyes. "Then it's going to be the hard way. I've already talked to Mr. Thompson. I'm filing for divorce, claiming abandonment of the home. After all, you're the one who left home, isn't that right? And we're going to sell the pharmacy." I felt as if the ground had disappeared from under my feet. "The pharmacy is mine. I bought it with my inheritance money." "But it's in both our names, my dear. We married in community of property. Forgot? Half of everything is mine." He came closer, his strong cologne making me nauseous. "Be sensible, Margaret. Take the money and leave. Start over somewhere else. It will be better for everyone." I didn't respond. I couldn't find words in the face of such cruelty. "Think about it," he said before leaving. "You have until the end of the week to decide." When the door closed behind him, I fell to my knees on the pharmacy floor and sobbed like a child. It wasn't enough that they had destroyed my marriage, my family. Now they wanted to take away my livelihood, my reason for living. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay looking at the ceiling of the storage room, trying to find a way out. I couldn't lose the pharmacy. It was all I had left. It was more than a business. It was my purpose, my way of helping others. The following days were a nightmare. I noticed that more and more customers stopped coming. I found out later that Walter and Julie's father, an influential man in town, were spreading rumors about me. They said I adulterated medications, that I charged abusive prices to the poorest, exactly the opposite of what I always did. Meanwhile, the divorce process moved forward. As Walter predicted, the judge considered that I had abandoned the home. After all, I left without taking my things, without saying where I was going. In the hearing, Julie testified against me. Dressed like a demure young lady, with a loose dress that hid her already growing belly, she spoke about how I was never present, how I prioritized strangers over my family. My mother always preferred to help others rather than take care of us, she said, tears in her eyes. Fake tears that fooled everyone but me, who had known her since she was a baby. How many times I needed her, and she wasn't there, always at the pharmacy, always with her patients. I tried to defend myself, explain that I worked to give them a better life, that I never imagined that my own husband and adopted daughter were scheming behind my back, but my words sounded empty in the face of their accusations. In the end, I lost almost everything. The house went to Walter. Of our assets, I received only a small part, much less than would be fair. And as for the pharmacy, I managed to keep it, but at a high price. I had to pay Walter an amount that left me almost destitute. Those were terrible months. The clientele decreased so much that I could barely pay the bills. I had to let go of my only employee and began working alone, opening and closing every day. At night, I continued sleeping in the storage room as I didn't have money to rent a decent place. The worst was seeing Walter and Julie around town, arm in arm, her belly growing each day. People seemed to have forgotten that until a few months ago, he was her father. Now they saw them as a couple expecting their first child, while I was the failed woman, abandoned, who had lost everything. The baby was born in mid-1969, a boy, I found out from Mrs. Carmichael, one of the few customers who remained loyal to me. They named him August, my grandson, who would never know me as his grandmother. I tried not to think about it, to concentrate on work, on the few people who still came to the pharmacy. But at night, alone in my damp storage room, I allowed myself to cry silently, remembering everything I had lost. It was during this time that I seriously thought about giving up, not just the pharmacy, but life itself. There were days when the despair was so great that I saw no point in continuing. What was left for me? A failing pharmacy, a destroyed reputation, a family that betrayed me in the worst possible way. I remember one particularly difficult night. It was raining heavily outside, and the storage room's roof had leaks. I put buckets to catch the water, but everything was still damp. Sitting on my improvised bed, I looked at the medicine bottles on the shelves and thought how easy it would be to mix some and end that suffering. I even picked up some bottles, looking at the labels, mentally calculating the doses. As a pharmacist, I knew exactly what to do to make it quick and painless. But then something happened that changed everything. A strong thunderclap shook the windows of the pharmacy, and soon after I heard desperate knocks on the door. It was almost 11 at night. Who could it be? I hesitated, afraid. What if it was Walter coming to finish destroying me? The knocking continued, stronger. Finally, I gathered courage and went to the door, holding a piece of wood as protection. "Who is it?" I shouted through the closed door. "Please, open up! I need help!" answered a female voice I didn't recognize. I opened the door, just a crack, and saw a middle-aged woman soaked by the rain, with a desperate expression. "My name is Olivia," she said, shivering with cold. "My car broke down on the road and I walked here. I saw the light of your pharmacy. I'm in pain. I think it's my gallbladder. Do you have any medicine?" I opened the door completely and let the woman in. Olivia was pale, bent over in pain. I took her to the storage room where she could sit and began examining her. "You're not from here, are you?" I asked, while checking her vital signs. "No," she answered between groans of pain. "I'm moving here. I'm a doctor. I'm going to take over the town's health clinic. A doctor, a stranger who didn't know my story, who didn't judge me. At that moment, something lit up inside me. A small flame of hope that I thought was completely extinguished. I took care of Olivia the best I could that night. I gave her medication for the pain and for the inflammation. As the rain wasn't letting up, I offered my improvised bed for her to spend the night. We both slept in that cramped storage room, sharing the few blankets I had. Little did I know that that night would mark the beginning of a new phase in my life, a phase of reconstruction, of discovering strengths I didn't know I had. A phase where I would learn that sometimes you have to lose everything to find what really matters. The next morning the rain had stopped, but the sky remained cloudy, as if reflecting my state of mind. I woke up before Olivia and prepared a simple coffee with the little I had. When she awoke, she seemed much better. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, sitting on the improvised chair I had made with wooden crates. "If it weren't for you, I don't know what would have happened." I served the coffee, and we sat together on that silent morning. Olivia told me she was a widow. Her husband had passed away 2 years ago. They didn't have children. She was coming from the city to take over the town's health clinic, which had been without a doctor for months. "And you live here in the pharmacy?" she asked, looking around, noticing my few belongings scattered around the storage room. I don't know why, but at that moment, with that stranger that fate had placed at my door, I felt I could open my heart. I told everything about Walter, about Julie, about how I lost my family, my house, almost lost my pharmacy, and how the entire town turned its back on me. As I spoke, I expected to see in her eyes the same judgment I saw in everyone's eyes in town. But what I found was different. It was understanding. It was indignation on my behalf. It was respect. "You are an extraordinary woman, Margaret," she said when I finished my account. "Many would have given up. You're still fighting." Her words touched something deep inside me. How long had it been since I heard someone speak to me like that? With admiration instead of pity or contempt. Olivia stayed longer than she intended that morning. Her car would be towed to the town's mechanic shop, and the repair would take a few days. I offered my storage room for her to stay, but she insisted on going to the small guest house in the main square. "But I'll come back tomorrow," she promised before leaving. "I want to see your pharmacy functioning, and who knows, maybe we can talk about some ideas I've had." That night, lying in my lonely bed, I thought a lot about the unexpected encounter with Olivia. It seemed that fate, after taking so much from me, was offering a small opportunity. A friend, an ally. I wasn't sure, but for the first time in many months, I felt a glimmer of hope. Olivia kept her word and came back the next day, and the next, and the next. While her car was in the shop, she spent afternoons at the pharmacy with me, observing my work, talking with the few customers who still came. I noticed that her presence brought a subtle change. People seemed less hostile when she was around. After all, she was the new doctor in town, someone they would need at some point. It was on one of those afternoons, while we were preparing some compounded medications together, that Olivia made me a proposal that would change everything. "I've been thinking, Margaret, the health clinic is quite basic, lacking a lot of things, and your pharmacy, although well-equipped, has few customers. What if we joined forces? What if we transformed this place into a small community clinic? I could attend right here in a back room, and you would continue with the pharmacy in the front. We could even offer more accessible prices for those most in need." I looked at her, surprised by the proposal. It was a bold idea that would require investment, hard work, and, mainly, facing the town's prejudice. "Do you really think it would work? The people here, they don't see me in a good light." Olivia smiled, that determined smile that I was beginning to know well. "People go where they find good service, Margaret. When they realize the quality of our work, the past won't matter anymore. Besides," she added, with a mischievous gleam in her eyes, "I'm new in town. I don't know anyone. If they start with gossip, I'll pretend I don't understand what they're talking about." I couldn't help but smile. It had been so long since I had truly smiled that my face seemed strange, as if it had forgotten how to make that movement. And what about the money? We would need to renovate, buy equipment. I have some savings set aside. And you? I hesitated before answering. I had a little money hidden. What was left after paying Walter for his part in the pharmacy. It was my only security. I have something, I finally admitted, but I don't know if it's enough. We don't need to do everything at once. We can start little by little, expanding as we get resources. The important thing is to take the first step. That night I couldn't sleep properly. Olivia's proposal spun in my mind. It was risky, certainly, but continuing as I was also risky. The pharmacy was barely sustaining itself. In a few months, I might have to close the doors anyway. By the morning, when Olivia appeared, my decision was made. "Let's do this," I said, extending my hand to her. "Let's create our community clinic." That was how, in October 1969, we began the transformation of my small pharmacy into the first community clinic in the region. We used our savings to renovate the space. The storage room where I lived was transformed into a consulting room for Olivia. We bought a proper bed for examinations, some basic equipment, medications that I couldn't stock before. Olivia suggested that I leave the storage room and rent a small room at the same guest house where she was staying. I was reluctant at first. Every penny was precious for our project, but she insisted. "You need a decent place to sleep, Margaret. You can't live like a refugee forever. Besides, what impression will we give patients if they find out you sleep among the medications?" She was right, as always. I rented a small but clean room at Mrs. Elaine's guest house. Having a real bed, a private bathroom, being able to take a hot shower before sleeping was a simple luxury that I had forgotten. The first weeks were difficult. Despite all our efforts, few patients appeared. The residents still hesitated to come to my pharmacy, now called St. Clair Community Clinic, a name chosen by Olivia in honor of the saint who protects those in need. "Be patient," Olivia would tell me when I began to get discouraged. "Trust is earned little by little." And she was right. Once again, the change began gradually. First were the travelers, people passing through town who didn't know my story. Then the poorer residents from the outskirts, who couldn't afford the prices of the private doctor who attended on the other side of town. Little by little, even some of the old customers began to return. One morning, I was organizing some medications when I heard the doorbell. Upon turning around, I saw Mrs. Jenkins, that same lady who had brought me the first news about rumors in town. "Good morning, Margaret," she said, seeming uncomfortable. "I heard that you now have a doctor here." "Yes, Mrs. Jenkins. Dr. Olivia attends every morning. Can I schedule an appointment for you?" She nodded, avoiding my gaze. "My blood pressure isn't good and Dr. Thompson charges too much." I scheduled the appointment, and when she was leaving, Mrs. Jenkins turned and said something that took me by surprise. "You know, Margaret, not everyone believed the stories they told about you. Some of us, well, some know how to recognize an injustice when we see one." I was speechless. Before I could respond, she had already left, the bell on the door tinkling behind her. That was the first sign that things were changing, not just for the clinic, but for me too. The pain was still there. I think it would never completely disappear, but now there was something more. A purpose, a mission. Olivia and I worked tirelessly. Little by little, our small community clinic gained a reputation. We attended to everyone, regardless of their financial condition. For those who couldn't pay, we created a barter system. They brought vegetables from their gardens, eggs from their chickens, or simply offered a few hours of work to help clean or organize the clinic. At the beginning of 1970, we could no longer handle all the patients by ourselves. We hired a young, recently graduated nurse, Teresa, and an assistant for the pharmacy, Clara. Our small but dedicated team worked miracles with the limited resources we had. It was also during this time that we gained support from the town hall. The mayor, seeing the good work we were doing, offered a small monthly subsidy for us to attend to the social cases referred by municipal assistants. It wasn't a lot of money, but it helped keep the doors open. Over time, our work began to be recognized even outside the town. Doctors from neighboring towns referred patients to us, especially for consultations with Olivia, who proved to be an excellent diagnostician. I, who was once seen as a failed, abandoned woman, came to be respected again. Not for being the wife of a successful businessman or the mother of a beautiful girl, but for my own worth, for my knowledge, for my dedication to the community. At night, in my small room at the guest house, I used to reflect on how life takes turns. If someone had told me in those dark days after the betrayal that one day I would be happy again, have purpose, I wouldn't have believed it. But there I was, rebuilding my life from the ashes like a phoenix. Of course, not everything was roses. There were difficult days when the memory of what I lost returned with full force. Days when I crossed paths with Walter on the street and he turned his face, pretending not to see me, or when I spotted Julie from afar, with little August in her arms, my grandson who would never know me as his grandmother. On one of these occasions, I was at the market buying groceries when I saw Julie on the other side of the fair. She didn't see me immediately, and I could observe her for a moment. She looked older than her 18 years, with dark circles under her eyes and a tired expression. The baby in her arms was crying, and she was trying to calm him without success. Our gazes met for an instant. I saw a flash of something in her eyes, remorse, regret, before she quickly looked away and headed in another direction. That brief exchange of looks stayed with me for days. My daughter, whom I had raised with so much love, was now a stranger to me and I to her. What would have happened if I had gone to her at that moment? Talked to her? Met my grandson? I mentioned this to Olivia one night while we were dining together in the small kitchen we had installed at the back of the clinic. "You still miss them?" she observed. It wasn't a question, but a statement. I miss who they were before or who I thought they were. It's hard to explain. Olivia covered my hand with hers, a simple gesture of understanding that meant more than 1,000 words. The pain never completely disappears, Margaret, but we learn to carry it in a different way. It becomes part of us, but it no longer defines us. Olivia spoke from her own experience. Over the months, she had told me about her husband, about how she had lost him to aggressive cancer, about how she had to rebuild her life afterward. We were two women who knew well the bitter taste of loss, but who had chosen to move forward. And so we continued, day after day, building something new and meaningful from the ruins of what we had lost. Our small community clinic grew, became a refuge for many, a place of healing not just for bodies, but also for wounded souls. The storage room, where I once thought about taking my own life, was now a space where other lives were saved daily. The pharmacy I almost lost was now a vital center for the entire community. And I, who had been shattered by the betrayal of those I loved most, was rebuilding myself, piece by piece, day by day. It was in this process of reconstruction that I discovered a strength within me that I didn't know existed, a resilience that surprised me, and, above all, a capacity to love again. Not romantic love, but a broader love, directed at all those who crossed the doors of our clinic seeking help. Each smile of gratitude, each handshake, each "God bless you," whispered by grateful lips, was a small patch on my broken heart. And little by little, that heart began to beat again with purpose and hope. Life went on, and I with it. The years passed, and our community clinic grew more than we ever imagined. From a small pharmacy with an improvised consulting room in the back, we transformed the space into a respected health center throughout the region. In 1975, we already had 3 doctors, Olivia and 2 more young doctors, whom she managed to attract to our cause. 5 nurses, a small ward for short-term admissions, and even a modest laboratory for basic tests. I no longer lived at Mrs. Elaine's guest house. With the savings I managed to make, I bought a simple but cozy small house 2 blocks from the clinic. It was small compared to the mansion Walter built on the outskirts of town. Yes, he prospered quite a bit in business, but it was mine. My little corner of peace, decorated with plants I cared for myself, with books I loved, with good memories of the new friends I made over the years. On that June morning of 1978, winter was beginning to announce itself with a fine drizzle and a fog that covered the streets of the town. I arrived early at the clinic, as I always did. I liked to have a few moments alone before the team arrived to organize my ideas, prepare the day's medications, review the charts of the most serious patients. The phone rang when I had just put the water on for coffee. I answered quickly, thinking it might be an emergency. St. Clair Community Clinic. "Good morning, Margaret." The voice on the other end of the line was familiar, but I couldn't immediately identify it. "This is Jane from St. Joseph Hospital in the city." Jane was an old college colleague who now ran a large hospital about 2 hours from our town. "Jane, what a nice surprise. How are you?" "I'm fine, but I called about an urgent matter. We have an emergency here, and I need to transfer a patient to you. It's a child with a severe allergic reaction. He's stabilized now, but he's from your town, and the parents prefer to continue treatment closer to home." "Of course, send him over. We have beds available, and Dr. Olivia is a specialist in allergies. What's the child's name?" There was a small pause before Jane answered. "The name is August. August Winters." I felt my heart leap. Winters was Walter's last name. August, my grandson, Julie's son, whom I had never met, who now must have been about 9 years old. "Margaret, are you there?" Yes, I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. "When will they arrive?" "They're leaving now. They should arrive in about 2 hours. The parents are accompanying." After hanging up, I stood still in the middle of the room, feeling my heart beating rapidly. After almost 10 years without having any contact with Julie or Walter, besides occasional encounters on the streets of town, which always ended with them looking away, I was about to receive them at my clinic. And worse, it was my grandson who was sick, a child I had never met, but who carried my blood. When Olivia arrived an hour later, I told her about the situation. She knew me too well not to notice my agitation. "Do you want me to handle this alone?" she offered, always concerned with my well-being. "You don't have to be present when they arrive." "No," I answered firmly. "I'm not going to hide. This is my clinic as much as yours, and besides, he's my grandson, Olivia, an innocent child who is not to blame for anything." She nodded, respecting my decision, but I saw the concern in her eyes. Olivia knew how much that wound still hurt, even after so many years. The next 2 hours were the longest of my life. We prepared a bed in the pediatric ward, separated the medications that would probably be needed for a severe allergic reaction. We alerted the team, and I tried to keep calm, tried to prepare myself for the moment when I would again see the faces that were once my family. When the car stopped in front of the clinic, I went to the window. I saw Walter getting out first, older, with some gray strands in his hair, which was previously totally black, but still imposing in his expensive suit. Then Julie got out, now a 27-year-old woman, no longer the teenager I knew. And finally, in her arms, a pale boy with red spots on his face and arms, clearly uncomfortable. I took a deep breath and went to the door to receive them. I saw the surprise in both their eyes when they saw me. Perhaps they didn't know this was my clinic. Perhaps Jane hadn't mentioned that detail. "Good morning," I said, keeping my voice professional. "You must be August's parents. We've already prepared everything to receive him. Please come in." Walter seemed to hesitate for a moment, but concern for his son spoke louder. They entered in silence, following me to the pediatric ward, where Olivia was already waiting. The following hours were a blur of medical activities. August had had a severe allergic reaction to peanuts, something that not even his parents knew he was allergic to. At the hospital in the city, they had managed to control the initial reaction, but he would need to be under observation for at least 48 hours, since there was a risk of a second reaction. During all this time, I remained professional, helping Olivia, checking the boy's vital signs, preparing the medications. I avoided looking directly at Walter or Julie, focusing only on the small patient. August was a handsome boy, with bright, intelligent eyes, despite the discomfort he felt. He had his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. While taking care of him, I couldn't help but think about how it would have been if things were different, if I had been part of his life from the beginning, if he knew me as his grandmother. When night came, August was stable, sleeping under the effect of antihistamines. I explained to Walter and Julie that only one of them could remain in the room during the night. "I'll stay," Julie quickly said. "You can go home, rest, and come back in the morning." Walter seemed relieved with the suggestion. He was never very good in hospitals or situations of illness. He preferred to take the folder of hospital transfer documents to analyze at home. "I'll ask them to bring a cot for you," I said to Julie, still avoiding looking directly at her. "And there's a small pantry at the end of the hall where you can prepare coffee or tea if you need it." She nodded, murmuring a "thank you," almost inaudible. It was the first word she directed to me since arriving. It was late at night when I finally finished my tasks and was preparing to go home. I passed by the pediatric ward to do a final check on August before leaving. The boy was sleeping peacefully, his breathing much more regular, the red spots beginning to disappear. Julie was sitting next to the bed, looking exhausted. "You should rest a bit," I said softly. "He is stable now. You can lie down on the cot. The nurses will monitor him during the night." She raised her eyes to me, and for the first time in almost 10 years we really looked at each other. Not as ex-mother-in-law and ex-daughter-in-law, not as betrayed mother and betraying daughter, but simply as two women, one exhausted by the fear of losing her son, the other offering professional comfort. "Thank you," she said again, and this time her voice had a different note. "For taking care of him, for everything." I nodded slightly, not knowing what to say. The silence between us was loaded with 10 years of unspoken hurt, of unanswered questions, of a shared story that had ended in the worst possible way. "He'll be fine," I assured, returning to the safe ground of medicine. The reaction was controlled in time. "Tomorrow we'll do some tests to confirm the peanut allergy and possibly identify other allergies. It's important that you know exactly what to avoid in the future." She nodded, and I turned to leave. I was almost at the door when I heard her voice again. "Margaret," I stopped without turning around. "He asks about you sometimes." I felt my heart tighten. I turned slowly. "Ask about me?" Julie looked away, seeming uncomfortable. "He knows he has a grandmother. We don't hide that from him. When he sees other children with their grandmothers, he asks why he has never met his." "And what do you answer?" I asked, my voice almost a whisper. "That you live far away, that you're busy." A convenient lie. Better than telling the truth, I suppose. Better than explaining to an innocent child the betrayal that marked our family. "I understand," I replied simply. Once again, silence settled between us. There was so much to be said, so many questions not asked, so many explanations never offered. But that was not the moment, nor the place. "Rest a bit," I repeated. "Nurse Teresa will be on duty tonight. Any change, she'll call the doctor on duty immediately." I left the room and walked down the silent corridor of the clinic. My steps echoed on the floor, marking the rhythm of my agitated thoughts. Upon reaching the front door, I looked back at the long corridor that led to the pediatric ward where my grandson, yes, my grandson, was sleeping. Fate had strange ways of working. After almost 10 years, without any significant contact with Julie or Walter, it was a medical emergency that brought us together under the same roof again, and not just anywhere, but at the clinic I built from the ashes of my destroyed life. That night at home I couldn't sleep. I lay looking at the ceiling, reviewing the day in my mind, remembering August's pale little face, Julie's tired eyes, Walter's distant figure. What would happen now when August recovered? Would we go back to being strangers, avoiding each other on the streets of town? Or had something changed with this unexpected encounter? The next morning, I arrived early at the clinic, as always. I went first to the pediatric ward. August was awake, sitting on the bed, drinking a glass of juice that the nurse had brought him. Julie was sleeping awkwardly curled up on the small cot beside the bed. "Good morning," I said softly to the boy. "How are you feeling today?" He looked at me with those green eyes, so similar to his mother's, but there was a curiosity, a liveliness in them that reminded me of myself when I was young. "Better," he answered. "I'm not itching so much anymore." "That's a good sign." I smiled, approaching to check the vital signs on the monitor beside the bed. "The spots are also diminishing." "Are you a doctor?" he asked, observing me with attention. "No, I'm a pharmacist. I prepare the medicines that doctors prescribe." "Like a good witch who makes magic potions?" he asked. And there was a gleam of childlike admiration in his eyes that melted me inside. "Something like that," I smiled. "But they're not magic potions. They're scientific medications." "Still cool," he declared, with the absolute conviction that only children possess. Then, leaning forward a bit, as if he was going to tell me a secret, he added, "When I grow up, I want to be a doctor. Or a scientist or an astronaut, I haven't decided yet." "All are wonderful professions," I replied, feeling a lump in my throat. This was my grandson, blood of my blood, and this was the first conversation we were having. It was at this moment that Julie woke up, startled to see us talking. There was something in her eyes, fear, worry, when she saw how close we were. "Good morning," I said, getting up quickly and adjusting her disheveled hair. "August, are you feeling better?" The rest of the day followed its course. Olivia arrived and did a complete evaluation of August, confirming that he was responding well to the treatment. Walter appeared shortly after, bringing clean clothes for Julie and a small teddy bear for his son. I kept my distance, observing from afar this family that was once mine. There was a strange dynamic to them, something I couldn't define exactly. They didn't seem happy. Despite the obvious concern for their sick son, there was an underlying tension between Walter and Julie, a subtle distancing that only very attentive eyes or someone who knew them intimately in the past could notice. At the end of the afternoon, Olivia determined that August could be discharged the next day if he continued improving at this rate. I explained to Julie the care they should take at home, the medications they would need to continue administering, the warning signs for a possible relapse. "And he'll need to do some allergy tests in a few weeks," I concluded, handing her a detailed list of instructions to identify exactly what triggered the reaction and if there are other allergens that should be avoided. She nodded, holding the paper as if it were something precious. "Thank you for all of this, for the way you took care of him." There was something in her voice that made me look more closely at her. Her eyes were watery, and it didn't seem to be just from the relief of seeing her son improving. "It's our job," I replied simply. "We do the same for any patient." "Even so," she insisted, her voice low so that August, who was playing with the teddy bear on the bed, wouldn't hear. "After everything, you could have refused to attend to us, could have sent us to another clinic. Nobody would blame you for that." I remained silent for a moment, reflecting. Yes, I could have done that. It would have been my right after the way you treated me. But what kind of person? What kind of healthcare professional would I be if I denied care to a sick child because of past hurts? "August is not to blame for anything," I finally replied. "He is just an innocent child who needs medical care. And as for you and Walter, well, I learned over these years that holding grudges only hurts ourselves." She lowered her eyes, and I saw a tear run down her face. "We weren't happy, you know," she said so low that I almost didn't hear. "We never were. It was all an illusion." Before I could respond, and what could I say in the face of such a confession? Walter entered the room carrying some papers. "The insurance approved everything," he announced, without noticing the tension between us. "They'll cover the expenses of the hospitalization and future exams." The moment had passed. Julie quickly wiped away her tears and forced a smile for her husband. The mask returned to its place, and once again, they were a perfect family, the successful couple with their adorable son. But I had seen a crack in that facade and knew there was much more there than appeared. The next day, as predicted, August was discharged. His spots had almost completely disappeared. His breathing was normal, and he no longer showed signs of discomfort. I was the one who finalized all the papers and delivered the medication that should be continued at home, along with detailed instructions for the parents. Any change, however minor, don't hesitate to bring him back, I stressed, looking directly at Julie, who seemed to absorb every word as if her life depended on it. And remember, no peanuts or derivatives until we do the complete allergy tests, I added, this time looking at August, who made a face. But I like peanut candy, he complained with that pout that only children know how to make. I know you do, but we need to be sure of what exactly causes your allergy before allowing certain foods, I explained patiently. It's for your own good. He sighed, resigned to adult wisdom, which at that moment seemed so unfair to his childish eyes. I'll schedule the return for 2 weeks from now, I said to Julie, for the allergy tests. She nodded, and there was something in her eyes, a silent request, an unasked question that I couldn't completely decipher. Before they left, August turned to me with that spontaneity that only children possess. Thank you, magic medicine lady, he said with a smile that showed a small gap where a baby tooth was missing. You're really cool. I felt my heart melt. I smiled back, resisting the urge to hug him, to tell him who I really was. You are a very brave patient, August. Take good care of yourself, all right? And so they left. I stood at the door of the clinic watching the car drive away, feeling a confused mixture of emotions. Relief that everything had ended well, sadness at seeing my grandson leave again for a life of which I was not a part, and a tiny bit of hope, tenuous and almost imperceptible, that something had changed with this unexpected encounter. Life followed its course. The clinic continued full, our work more in demand than ever. I tried not to think too much about August, about Julie, about that whole situation, concentrating on the daily tasks that always gave me purpose and satisfaction. 2 weeks passed quickly. On the day scheduled for August's return, I confess I was nervous. I arranged my hair with more care than usual, put on a little perfume, small vanities that I hadn't allowed myself for years. Olivia noticed, of course. She always noticed everything. You look pretty today, she commented with a discreet smile when I arrived at the clinic. Nonsense, I replied, feigning disinterest. I just decided to get a bit more dressed up. Her smile said she didn't believe me, but she didn't insist. We were too intimate friends to need words for certain things. The entire morning I was restless, checking the clock every few minutes. August's appointment was scheduled for 11 o'clock. At 10:30, I began to hover around the reception, checking charts that didn't need to be checked, organizing medications that were already perfectly organized. At 11 o'clock sharp, the door of the clinic opened. But it wasn't Julie with August. It was just Julie, alone, looking nervous and uncomfortable. Good morning, she said timidly. I know we had an appointment scheduled for August today, but did something happen? I asked, immediately concerned. Did he have another reaction? No, she hurried to clarify. He's fine. It's just that he couldn't come today. Walter took him to spend the day with some cousins on the farm. There was something strange in her explanation, a hesitation, a shifty look that made me suspicious. After years of dealing with patients, I learned to recognize when someone isn't telling the whole truth. I understand, I replied, trying to hide my disappointment. We can reschedule for another day then? Actually, she began, seeming to gather courage for something. Actually, I would like to speak with you in private if you have a few minutes. I confess I was surprised. After almost 10 years, without exchanging more than strictly necessary words, what could Julie want to talk to me about now? Of course, I replied, trying to keep my voice neutral. We can use my office. It's this way. I led her through the clinic to a small room in the back that I used for administrative work. It was a simple but welcoming space, with a window that overlooked a small inner garden. I indicated a chair for her to sit and took my place on the other side of the desk. How can I help you? I asked, when she continued in silence, nervously twisting the scarf she carried in her hands. I don't know where to begin, she confessed, her voice almost a whisper. I've rehearsed this moment in my head for so long, and now that I'm finally here, the words seem to escape. I waited patiently. Life taught me that sometimes silence is more eloquent than any word. First, she finally began, I want to thank you again for how you took care of August, for how you cared for him even after everything. I nodded slightly, without interrupting her. And second, I want to ask for forgiveness. Her voice failed on the last word, and I saw that her eyes were full of contained tears. Forgiveness, I repeated, the word weighing between us like lead. I know I don't deserve it. I know that what I did, was unforgivable. Betraying the trust of the woman who raised me as a daughter, who gave me a home, love, education, there is no excuse for that. The tears now ran freely down her face, and she didn't even try to contain them or wipe them anymore. Why now, Julie? I asked softly. After all these years, why come ask for forgiveness now? She took a deep breath, as if gathering strength for what would come next. Because I can't stand living in this lie anymore. Because I want my son to know his real grandmother, not a fabricated story. Because I'm tired, Margaret, so tired. Her voice broke at the end, and she covered her face with her hands, openly sobbing. Now I sat, observing her, a storm of contradictory emotions inside me. Part of me wanted to comfort her, hug her like in the old times, when she was just my frightened little girl with a nightmare. Another part wanted to keep the distance, protect myself from more pain. We weren't happy, she continued after a few moments, wiping away the tears with the scarf. We never were. It was all a facade, a lie that we told to others and to ourselves. What happened? I asked, unable to contain my curiosity. After I left? She gave a sad smile without humor. You mean after we expelled you? After we stole your life, your home, your family? Let's call things by their name, Margaret. That's what we did. I remained silent, surprised by the brutal frankness. At the beginning, it seemed like we had won, she continued. We had the house, the money, the respect of the town, or at least a distorted version of it. Walter expanded the business, bought more stores, built that ostentatious mansion on the outskirts. I left school, of course. A 17-year-old pregnant girl couldn't continue studying, not at that time, not in that town. She paused, collecting her thoughts. When August was born, I thought things would improve, that we would be a real family. But Walter, he was never really a father to August, always too busy with business, always absent, even when he was physically present. And with me? Well, I soon discovered that the love he said he felt for me was actually something very different. Different how? I asked, though I suspected the answer. Control, possession. I was a trophy, an achievement. The young, beautiful wife of the successful businessman, the mother of his son, but never a partner, never an equal. Over time, he became increasingly controlling, more jealous, monitored my spending, chose my clothes, decided who I could or couldn't talk to. I nodded slowly. I recognized in that behavior the same Walter I knew. Charming and attentive on the surface, manipulative and controlling in the shadows. I had just been too blind to see it during our marriage. Why didn't you leave? I asked. Why didn't you leave him? She gave another bitter laugh. Go where? Without education, without a profession, with a small child. And besides that, there was the shame. How could I admit to the world and to myself that I had thrown away my relationship with you, the only mother I really knew, for an adolescent fantasy that turned into a nightmare? Her words hit me deeply. I had never thought about what happened from that perspective, that Julie might also be trapped in her own golden cage, a victim of her immature choices and the manipulation of a much older and more experienced man. And August? I asked, thinking about the bright boy I briefly met. How is he in the middle of this? Her face lit up a bit when talking about her son. August is the only good thing that came out of all this. He's so intelligent, so curious about the world, has such a big heart. And you know what's most ironic? He's so much like you, Margaret, not physically, of course, but in spirit. The same thirst for knowledge, the same sensitivity towards others. I felt my eyes fill with tears. My grandson, whom I barely knew, carried something of me besides blood. He asks about you, Julie continued, more than I told you at the hospital. Since he was little, he always wanted to know about his grandmother. Why didn't he know her? Why did she never come visit him like the grandmothers of other boys? And what did you say? I asked, my voice choked with emotion. At the beginning, we repeated the lie that Walter created, that you had gone away very far, that you didn't care about us. But as August grew, it became harder to maintain that version. He's very perceptive, you know. He notices when adults are lying. She paused, taking a deep breath. About a year ago, I began to tell pieces of the truth, that you lived in the same town, that you were a respected pharmacist, that you helped many people. I didn't tell everything, of course. He's still a child, but I stopped painting you as the villain. And Walter, what did he think of this? Her face closed a bit. He doesn't know. August and I have our secrets, including his hospitalization in the Capitol Hospital wasn't accidental. I frowned, not understanding. What do you mean? Are you saying the allergic reaction was intentional? No, of course not, she exclaimed, horrified. The reaction was real. He really ate peanut candy without knowing it had peanuts and had an allergic crisis, but we could have taken him to the local hospital or any other clinic. I chose to take him to the Capitol, to the hospital where your friend Jane works, precisely so that he would be transferred here afterwards. I was open-mouthed at the revelation. You planned all this so that I would meet August. She nodded, seeming simultaneously ashamed and determined. I needed an excuse to come here, for you to meet him, to initiate this conversation. Walter would never allow it if he knew. He still hates you, Margaret, hates what you represent, the woman who moved on, who built something significant without him, who is respected for her own merit and not as an extension of him. I remained silent, digesting all of that. It was a lot of information, a lot of emotion at once. And now? I finally asked. What do you want, Julie? What is the next step in this elaborate plan? She straightened her shoulders as if gathering courage. I want August to know his real grandmother, without lies, without pretenses. I want you to have a relationship, and I'm willing to confront Walter for it, if necessary. Even if it means ending my marriage. Yes, as I said, we're not happy. We never were. And August deserves more than to grow up in that cold house, full of rigid rules and appearances to maintain. I saw in her eyes a determination that reminded me of myself years ago when I decided to rebuild my life from the ashes. Perhaps Julie was no longer that immature and manipulable teenager I knew. Perhaps she had finally grown up amidst all that pain. And you? I asked. What do you want for yourself beyond that? She seemed surprised by the question, as if she had never really thought about it. I don't know, maybe go back to school. I always wanted to be a teacher, you know? Before everything happened. I like children, teaching them, but Walter always said it was too much work for too little return. I recognized in those words the same man who once tried to dissuade me from continuing with my pharmacy, who said my work was an expensive hobby and not a profession. It's not too late, I said softly. It's never too late to start over. Our hands were on the table a few inches apart. In a gesture that surprised us both, Julie extended hers, touching my fingers lightly, like a child testing the water temperature before entering. Do you forgive me? She asked, her voice almost a whisper. After everything we did, all the suffering we caused, can you forgive me? I looked at that woman in front of me. No longer the girl I raised, no longer the teenager who betrayed me, but an adult woman carrying the weight of wrong choices and seeking a path to redemption. Forgiveness, I replied slowly, is not something that is granted all at once, like a wrapped gift. It's a process, a path that we walk day by day. I'm still on that path, Julie. I can't promise that it will be easy or fast, but I'm willing to try for August, and maybe also for us. A solitary tear ran down her face, and this time it was a tear of relief, of hope, not of despair. It's more than I deserve, she said simply. That day, we made an agreement. August would begin to visit me regularly so that we could build a grandmother and grandson relationship. Julie would gradually explain to him who I was, without going into the painful details of the past. That would be for when he was older, if he ever needed to know. Walter didn't need to know about these visits, at least not immediately. It was a delicate situation, and Julie feared his reaction. I agreed to this temporary arrangement, although I didn't like the idea of more secrets, but I understood that some changes need to happen gradually. In the following weeks, August began to come to the clinic frequently, sometimes to help prepare medications, other times just to talk. Each visit was a small treasure for me. When he finally called me Grandma for the first time, I felt my heart almost explode with joy. Over time, Julie also began to change. She went back to studying, first in secret, then openly, defying Walter. She found in me and Olivia the support she never had. And slowly, the daughter I lost began to return to my life, not as the girl I raised, but as a woman in search of redemption and her own identity. Today, at 74 years old, I look back and see that life has mysterious ways. The betrayal that almost destroyed me ended up leading me to build something much greater than I would ever have built without that pain. Our community clinic now serves thousands of people per year. I have in August, now a young medical student, the continuation of a legacy that I thought I had lost. And as for Walter, he continues with his business, his mansion, his life of appearances. When he found out about my relationship with August, there was conflict, of course. But even he, over time, realized that he couldn't fight against the genuine love that his son felt for his grandmother. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past, nor should it. The scars remain as a reminder of what we survived. But choosing to forgive is deciding that the pain will not have the last word. It's making room for something new and beautiful to flourish, even in the most unlikely soil. If you're watching this video and going through your own storm, remember, the sun will shine again. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but one day you'll look back and see that even in the darkest moments, you were walking towards the light. Thank you for listening to my story. Please leave your like on this video, subscribe to the Grandma's Diary channel for more stories of life and overcoming, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I would love to know that my story reached so many different places. Until next time, my dears. Margaret.